Hey folks, Steve here with another Nations in Arms video. We are going to get started with the War of the First Coalition proper, but like many of my other video series covering a game, I'm not, we're going to take things slow, I guess, as I'll put it that way. I want to let these initial videos be a little more demonstrative in terms of the mechanics and allowing us to kind of talk through how movement works, how combats work, what modifiers come into play and what matters about them. And then, that may mean that this part one video for the War of the First Coalition may not cover a whole lot. In fact, we may not get through a full summer season of the game in this video, but we'll see. You will know better than I will as you're watching this video, and I've labeled it accordingly. So, however far we get, we'll kind of call that out. As we go through this series and we go through other scenarios, I will probably increase the pace. So during this video, we may show individual stacks of units moving across the map. The context of the situation, as you can see, we're largely showing parts of France and Germany and northern Italy here, and Austria. We'll do the combats very carefully, but over time, I will show less and less detail. So, I'm not going to show every activation. I'm not going to show maybe every combat because that would just take forever. And honestly, guys, recording this stuff takes much longer than just playing through it. Now, I know there are some folks out there that really want to see every little single move. I'm not going to be able to do that for the whole of every scenario. It's just not time efficient. So we're not going to do that. But at least for this video, we'll try to take a closer look at things and play it out, and you guys can get a sense of how the game system works and all the sort of strategic considerations that all come together in this. Now, if you didn't watch my previous video for sort of the setup and explanation, I have a lot of additional mnemonic markers here. These are just to help me remember that a province with a red bingo chit is something that is going to be related to victory for the scenario. And then the color of these wooden discs that I happen to have just helps me recall who ultimately controls that space, regardless of nested control logic. So there are cases where a province can be owned by a minor power separate from itself. So, Bavaria might own something, and then Bavaria is allied with Austria. So we're just going to put gray discs on anything for Austria. Straightforward stuff. And so we're going to get started here pretty quickly. I don't want to waste too much time on preamble. I will recommend one thing to you watching this video. If you are interested in some supplemental material to enjoy in other contexts than watching a YouTube video, there are a lot of great books out there on the Napoleonic era and the Wars of the Revolution. Probably more Napoleonic than Wars of the Revolution for various reasons, I think. I don't have a good book on the First and Second Coalition Wars, unfortunately. But a great podcast that I do recommend folks check out is called Age of Napoleon. It's available on pretty much any major podcast app or service that you're used to seeing. The guy who does Age of Napoleon does a very good job of one, just talking to the subject matter and describing things in a very engaging way, not overly bombastic, but not very dry. So it just makes for very easy listening while you're doing something else. And I've listened to that podcast doing yard work, mowing the lawn, other, kind of monotonous tasks where, I can let my mind wander a little bit while I'm working, whatever I'm working, but the podcast is just engaging enough that it's very informative, pretty well researched as best as I can tell. He does a really good job. So go please check that out. He does cover a lot of the revolutionary period leading up to the actual wars of Napoleon. So you do get a lot of these historical details. I mean, honestly, I'd say most of my existing knowledge and appreciation for the event cards related to the revolutionary period of this game and the wars of the First and Second Coalition come from that podcast of just the little nitty gritty details of different things. And any ability of me to pronounce something is also based on the podcast. So please go check that podcast out. I've been listening to it for years at this point, in bits and pieces when I'm doing something, and it's just a really great one to have on in the background. So anyway, we're going to get started. This is the activations phase. So we normally in a game turn, we would start with a diplomacy and event phase. We do not do those. The scenario as dictated in the book is going to start in the activation phase of summer 1792. So while factions do start with some event cards, they by and large are not able to play those, I do not believe. I'm going to have to double check that. But if you watch the previous video, I go into the depths of what the cards are and kind of what's going to matter there. But I think for now, during this first season, we're going to focus on the military aspects, and the cards are going to come into play much later. In fact, I think the most important card of the game to kick things off, the Committee of Public Safety, we may not see played until the winter of this year due to what triggers when we start playing those cards. It may be better just to not do that. Now, the coalition actually starts with initiative, which means they get to pick a activation marker to come out of the cup first. Is just sort of the first play, and the decision making around that is kind of interesting. The rest of the chits will come out of the cup at random, which means we're not exactly sure to what degree the next chit is going to allow units to activate and that sort of thing. But at least at the start, the coalition can pick something. Now, we talked in the previous video about what the values on the chits mean. So I don't want to reiterate stuff I've already talked about, but the coalition player, and really in my mind, I'm playing, right now I'm technically Austria. Austria is the leader of the coalition at the beginning here because the French Republic, or I guess they're still a constitutional monarchy at the moment, but France has basically declared war on Austria. So Austria is sort of the primary opponent, and they have Prussia as an ally in the coalition. Britain, Spain, and the British allies are not yet joined the coalition, so they are technically neutral. So what do we want to do as the coalition? Well, understanding the way the activation system works, if I just look around the map, and you can kind of do this too, maybe a little harder to see at this camera angle. If you're watching this in HD, you should be able to see the values on the counters. But generally, the first number on any given counter is the leader's sort of activation rating. And if I just look around the map for a second, Coley is a 3, Wurttemberg is a 3, Latour is a 3, Wormser is a 4, Blankenstein is a 2, Esterhazy is a 3, Brunswick is a 3, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3. Okay, so if you just heard me rattle off those numbers, what number seems to come up a lot? That'd be the number 3. So I think what I'm going to do is have the coalition land 3 marker be the initiative marker at the very, very beginning. What does this mean? It means that our leaders with a 3 value or higher can activate. So that includes Wormser with a 4, and generally most of our stacks on the map. This will also mean that on future chit pulls, on 1s or 2s, all the guys that have already moved can move again, though it may mean that they're going to suffer attrition for it. So that feels like a decent compromise. So we're going to activate most of our leaders this one time, get into a good position. We can choose not to activate a leader and simply leave them unactivated where they're at. And there are going to be some circumstances where maybe we want to do that because we want someone to be sort of a reserve stack. But I think generally we need to get some of these other forces that are kind of way up here closer to the areas of fighting that are going to happen. We want to get Wormser up because he's got a pretty good stack, and handle it that way. And then it also provides the ability for some of these other units to activate a second time, enough of them anyway, when we pull these other chits. Keep in mind that stacks without a leader, or if there's a leader with a 1 value, and maybe there is, I'm not sure, those guys are only going to get to activate once with the land 1 marker for either side. So you got to think through, is this going to be a certain stack's only opportunity to move? Will they get another opportunity? if they're only going to get to activate once, and you draw the chit that's going to activate them, you might as well move them, because there's no sense in leaving those guys as a reserve. They're not going to get a chance to activate again, as opposed to some of these other better leaders where it's much more flexible on when you're going to get to activate them, and then deciding, do you hold them back? Do you activate them again and risk attrition to get them to do some significant thing? But obviously, the order of the chits will kind of make a little bit of fog of war. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. Okay, so anyway, getting through all that, we are going to have the Coalition Land 3 marker. Like I said, I'm going to just set this aside. We're near the other unused markers. And we're going to get started. So basically, at this part of the phase, the Coalition player can look at his units on the map and say, okay, anybody who can activate, we can choose to activate them and start moving them, basically one at a time, doing all their stuff, movement and combat and whatever, and then we'll place a first activation marker on that stack to denote that they have completed their move. And that's largely how this is going to go. Now, there are no army markers on the map that can possibly modify certain things that are going on in terms of movement, in like pulling a stack in and doing some movement and doing different things. Generally, it's going to be one stack per, so this should be relatively straightforward. There is something important that I want to talk about in terms of stacking, so in case there's questions along the way of, hey, why didn't you join up these forces? Stacking is actually really important in this game, and it's a little, I won't say unexpected or weird. I think there's some logic to it, but it's definitely worth commenting on. So for stacking, there's actually a really good chart in the Banania rules. So again, as a reminder from previous videos, I am using the Banania rewrite, which is available on Board Game Geek, as the sort of reorganized, rewritten rule set. You can watch the introduction video for this series to learn more about what all of that means as to why there's multiple versions of the rules, but just know that I'm using what I consider to just be a recent, well-organized set of rules to facilitate play. But there's a really good page in here about stacking. So generally, you can have a combat unit of 1 or 2 steps without a leader just hanging out. That is okay to do. You can have the 1 unit. But then you can have a leader with that 1 unit, and that leader is going to be a 1-star leader. So if you have a 1-star leader, he can only have with him 1 core functionally of 1 or 2 steps. If you have a 2-star leader, you can functionally have 2 core, with 4 steps. And if you are a 3-star leader or a 4-star leader, then you can have up to 6 steps, meaning 3 core functionally, with a subordinate leader of 1 or 2 stars. So if you have a situation where you have a leader, a 1-star leader with 1 unit, and he ends up in the same hex as another core without a leader, well, that leader can only have the 1 core. So one of those core will have to go away, which sounds very punishing, and it is. So you're going to have to pay attention to which leaders are where, and do they have enough capacity. If you've got a 3-star leader, and he's got 1 step with him, and he moves and joins with a 1-star leader and a unit, you're completely fine. The 3-star leader can now have those 4 steps all together, the 2 units with 4 steps, and that subordinate leader, that's okay. The way you get much bigger stacks is with an actual army marker. So the size of the army is going to be based on your leader. On the back of the 3-star or 4-star leaders, there's a number that's in the middle. So if they have Napoleon as an example here. When he's in command of an army, you flip his leader counter over, and it shows 18. So he can have 18 steps and 4 subordinate leaders, which is quite a lot. Now, the reason why you want to have subordinate leaders is because there are leader casualties, and those will tend to apply to the lowest ranked leader in your stack. So what you don't want is Napoleon with an army all by his lonesome trying to fight battles, because Napoleon could die. But what you want instead is Napoleon with a number of subordinate leaders who will eventually die. And because the leader force pools are so big, there are tons of leaders in this game. Don't be afraid if some of them start to die. You will have more leaders to replace them with, to promote and put into play. But you want to protect your best leaders in those kinds of situations. So something to watch out for. Generally speaking, I'm pretty certain, and maybe I should double check this for sanity's sake. I believe everything on the map is within the stacking rules. Like the setup didn't do something silly. But maybe what I should do is double check that right now before we start moving stuff. But this will be the reason why, as we start playing, I'm not joining up stacks. Like, I'm not creating a super doom stack of Austrians because I can't. Not at least until I get an army marker and a pretty good general to lead the army. or I guess, one of my generals is probably good enough, but I need an army marker and I need to get that set up. If I don't have the army marker, the best I can hope for is a 3-star general with 6 steps with another stack nearby to provide some level of mutual support operationally, but they're not going to be able to move around and be stacked together as one big uber stack. So no Death Star stacks in this game until the army markers start coming in, and then you generally want an army versus an army to contest each other with smaller stacks around providing support. So looking over things, I can confirm that all the units on the board are properly stacked according to setup, so no issues there. So we've got our land 3 marker played. We've got a pretty good understanding of our stacks that can activate and whether or not they can join up. What's another thing we should consider? Well, let's take a look at supply very quickly, just so we can understand how supply works at a very high level. So being in supply, you're basically always wanting to trace back to either a home, national country, national border fortress, or a capital. And I'm basically just going to be reading from the rule book here. The capital city of an allied minor, if the capital is a active fortress. And you can also use a depot in very specific cross-water circumstances, which I won't get into. But the tracing of supply is only for movement points, but you can use supply links in between the stack that is trying to trace supply back to one of those sources. Those are, I'm just going to generally say, activated, controlled by you fortresses. That is pretty much the easiest way to describe it most of the time. And you can use your allies' fortresses, and I believe you can use fortresses of those that are in your alliance, like your overall block alliance. So I'm fairly certain that Prussia can use Austrian fortresses as supply links back to Prussia, and vice versa. That's how I'm reading the rules. I don't see any issue with that interpretation. It says an allied, major or minor, unbesieged fortress. So there's allied as in a minor ally, but you can have an ally who's a major power, and I believe that counts as well. You can also use as a supply link a captured enemy fortress that you have activated. So in terms of like attacking into France, if the Austrians take Strasbourg and activate it, which there is a cost to doing so, and that you lose a step to restore the strength of the fortress, basically garrisoning it, you can use that place as an extension of your supply network. So basically in this game, you still need to, like, you can't be too sneaky. Like, the Austrians can't be sneaky and like come through here and then run around way back towards Paris. Like, they've got to watch their supply lines, and the supply lines are not very long. They can't be very long, so you've got to take some fortresses along the way, whether that's Rez or Dijon or Strasbourg or Lille or wherever. It will be important that we grab those fortresses, regardless of the position of armies. We need to keep our supply lines in relatively good shape. Now, there are other supply links that we can manifest as needed, but keeping in mind that they're relatively weak and susceptible to enemy action. So You can take a baggage train support unit and turn it into a depot, in which case the depot acts as a supply link, and a supply depot has a little tiny bit of defensive strength. Um, but generally, the depot and the baggage train just helps with other attritional issues. So you're kind of giving up, a finite resource for that. The other possibility is using a detachment. So I do have, like, there's various detachments on the board right now. Here's an example of a Piedmontese detachment. You can create a detachment by taking a step loss. I believe it's a step loss off of a unit, and you create this detachment. Basically, you're detaching some amount of men and resources away from an existing core unit, and you want to go send it off to do something, but that detachment can act as a supply link, the same as a depot. So as long as you're okay with having sort of a weak unit behind you, you can drop off a detachment to extend your supply line. So, whenever we're dealing with the invasion of Russia as the Imperial France under Napoleon, that kind of thing is going to be more needed when you're dealing with these much wider expanses of land, where in Germany and in France and even Italy, generally you're no more than a few hexes away from a fort. So it is a little more congested, where we're going to want to go for Strasbourg as Austria in the coalition. We're going to want to go for, or as we're going to want to go for Lille, and try to be in really good shape here to count back our supply through Flanders, through the Palatinate, Wurttemberg, back to Austria or Prussia, or wherever. And it does create some interesting situations where, like, in terms of the movement points, it's 4 movement points between supply links, and the terrain cost of territory factors into that. So just as an example, eventually the French are probably going to want to come in and take Turin. Well, what are the hex paths to get to Turin from France? Well, we can expect, I'll just shift the camera down a little bit, that Montesquieu here will want to head over to Turin if he can. Maybe eventually a guy named Napoleon will, but we'll see about that. But to get over there, we've got to trace over there. So what are the paths? Well, we could go, 1, 2, 3, 4, because these are mountain passes. So paths through the mountains are 2 movement points. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Well, Lyon is a supply source, but that's as far as we can get. Now, you could maybe try to say, because there's clear terrain in these hexes, maybe you should get to go 1, 2. Then you got to go 3, 4. And again, that's as far as you can go. So Montesquieu would have to drop a depot here in the mountains or a detachment before they could continue going 1, 2, 3 to Turin and still be in supply. And even if we were to take Turin and operate down here, we'd still then be tracing back to Turin, assuming we reactivated it, to the depot or detachment, then to Lyon. So you definitely need to plan out the large scale supply network, operations, so that your guys stay in supply. The different route would be through Provence, where we would go from Toulon, which is a fortress, from Toulon to Nice, which is really like 1, 2, 3, or it's enough to get into here. Then we could go, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that's not going to work. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that's not going to work. So from Nice, we'd have to go to Genoa and move along the coast here. So 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, and wrap around Piedmont. So there's different paths that can be taken wherever you're going, and you do have to think through, how are you going to get to where you're going to go. So all of that, the explanation is needed, so we can talk about how we're going to actually move our guys and do the thing. So generally, the Austrians will want to attack towards France, and they're going to want to make sure they do disrupt the French armies, but also capture those fortresses to ensure that their rear path tracing supply is relatively safe, and just generally, if the army stacks, or not the armies, but the stacks of units are supporting one another, mutually supporting each other's flanks, we shouldn't have any French, creeping behind us to cause trouble. So that's a general strategic comment. The other thing worth pointing out is how we actually do movement. We should talk about that for a second. So there is a terrain effects chart, shows all this stuff. Clear is 1 movement cost, desert is 2, woods is 2, mountain is 4, plus the hex side of mountains is a +2. So actual just straight up mountains are incredibly difficult to cross. Fortunately, there are the mountain passes that cost 2. You can see a swamp costs 2, a river crossing. Let me clarify that. There we go. A river crossing is a +2 or 1 if you have engineers, or adding 0 if you have pontoons. And then a bridge. It's not clear on the terrain chart. You have to look at the rules, but a bridge nullifies the river crossing penalty. So you definitely want to look at bridge crossings. There's several here in Lombardy and Venetia that are going to be kind of important to keep in mind. You definitely want to use those bridges wherever you can. Generally speaking, units have different movement capabilities in an activation. So if a force is made up entirely of cavalry or just a leader moving by themselves, I believe they have 8 movement points. Infantry have 6 movement points. And so generally, most stacks on the map, if there's some mixture of cavalry and infantry, are going to have 6 movement points. The stack has to move as a stack, and you can go as far as the slowest unit, the unit with the lowest amount of movement points in the stack, unless you're trying to drop them off or do some kooky stuff. There's one other exception with that, which is the baggage trains. So French baggage trains have 6 movement points. They're kind of special. The French are just good at that. But most, all the other powers' baggage trains only have a movement point factor of 4. So when we talk about the strategy behind our moves, we need to keep in mind that if a stack doesn't have a baggage train, and maybe doesn't need it, then yeah, they're generally going to move 6 movement points and fight combats and do whatever they're going to do. This is important for a stack like Wurmser's over here. So he's got a pretty decent force here, but he's got a baggage train. So if we activate Wurmser here, and we certainly can, we just start sending him out here, he can go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, if he wants to keep his baggage train. If he decides to leave it behind, which is certainly an option, he could instead go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and be headed through the mountains towards Venice in support of northern Italy. So he'd be along a little bit farther, and then subsequently get a little bit farther each turn. You can imagine that extra couple movement points pays off over time. But we're giving up the benefit of having the baggage train with us, which can offset attrition and supply checking, and can, again, extend our supply path if we are pushing into southern France and we need to head through the mountains. From Turin, 1, 2, 3, 4, Wurmser could leave the depot here and then be able to threaten Lyon a little more believably. So those are the kinds of things we need to keep in mind when we do these activations. So I know we're going through a lot of explanation, guys. This might be boring for you, or it might be really fascinating, but it's really important we talk about the hows and the whys before I start moving stuff, so that you understand it, and in future videos you know what the concerns are. So we got to watch out for supply. We generally aren't going to be moving super fast across the map in any given activation. You can imagine, due to the propensity of, forest over here, trying to find the paths through clear terrain will be faster. But if going through the woods, we're only going to go a couple of hexes at a time in any campaign action, which is going to force us, if we really want to make progress, to do those extra moves with attrition and that sort of thing. Now, there is a special rule for this scenario that we can't use forced marches in the summer of 1792. I believe that's referencing going a second time in the season. I'm going to double check that before we get underway here. But all of that matters here, right? How far can these guys go? Well, hopefully 6 movement points, in some cases only 4. Do we leave behind the baggage train to get 6 movement points? Where are we going to go in terms of the fronts? You can generally see that we have 2 primary fronts at the moment. We have the Rhine front, which I kind of include Flanders. You could almost say there's like the Low Countries front, but to me, it's all kind of one big front here, which is the Rhine front, where there's going to be fighting in Flanders, there's going to be fighting in the Palatinate, potentially spilling over into France if the Austrians can do well, the Prussians can do well. We're also likely going to have some level of Italian fighting, almost assuredly, and it's going to be important where the coalition can attack and defend. So generally, we should be able to go on the offensive up here. We have a number of stacks, quite good leaders. Brunswick's force is quite potent. We should be able to push in that theater. But in Italy, we're really rather weak. We have a detachment in Milan. We've got a detachment in Nice. And we've got Colli's 1 infantry corps at Turin. And that's kind of it, which is not much, especially when you look at Montesquieu's force, which is fairly sizable. He's got 5 steps of units, potent, certainly. Now, he only has a 2 activation, so there's a possibility that Montesquieu may not activate right away once the French start to get going. So there's definitely an incentive to use our initial movements here to move some forces in northern Italy to support Piedmont. If we can do that, there's obviously a lot of victory areas down here, important to hold. If we can get into good positions, we're certainly going to be, it will be a benefit to do that. On the French side, just to throw out there, you can see there's Geneva, that's important, it's neutral, and so is Switzerland, which is also needed for victory, is neutral. France cannot declare war on Geneva or Switzerland this summer, this season, because that has to be done as part of declaration of war at the beginning of a turn. So the French are going to want to take these areas, but there's going to be a delay on that, and so they too will be focused on probably defending or counterattacking as they can up here. And if they can get these guys activated, they probably will want to be pushing into Piedmont as best that they can to try to get something set up, maybe leave a reserve behind to seize these locations when it's feasible. So a lot of thoughts there, guys, a lot to consider, both in just how are we going to play this and then what are the strategies that are driving our decision making. We'll do a quick water drink break cut here and we'll start moving some counters. Okay, so, and I did double check in the rules. Forced March is having a second activation in a given season, and so because of the special rules for this season turn, any force that we activate will be activating just the 1 time. They will not get a second opportunity, though, in any other turn that would cause attrition. We don't even get that option here. Whatever, stack moves, wherever they end up, whatever they do, that is their only shot for the turn, regardless of the other markers that we may pull later in the turn. So all these generals with a 3 activation rating that we choose to move will move just the once. I think the easiest thing that we can do is move Wurmser, because where he's going to go is just west functionally. So we'll look at this guy here, and I think just to quickly show, he starts in Vienna. He has a baggage train with 4 movement points. He's got a cavalry. He's got an infantry and himself. So he's got 4 steps of combat units and an extra support unit. Support units don't add to the stacking limit, so he can very easily control this set. He is a 3-star leader, which means he could potentially pick up some units elsewhere, even pick up a subordinate leader too. But what we're going to do, just we'll do it fully. He's going to move 4 movement points. We are going to activate him. He's going to move 4 movement points with the baggage train. We'll take it with us, and we'll simply go 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're right at a point where if we wanted to go south through the mountain passes in the fall turn, the autumn turn, to support northern Italy, we could do that. If we wanted to stay north of the Alps and go into Germany, southern Germany, we could opt to do that as well. He can only get so far, and he's probably not going to run into anybody of significance this turn anyway. So it's really a simple thing to just simply go 1, 2, 3, 4, and he is done. Now we will mark that he is done with a marker. So they get in the game comes with the first activation marker, which you can put on a stack to show they've been activated once. And on the back side, there is a activation over display. So because of the special rule for this turn, we're going to go ahead and just put a activation over marker on him to denote that he is done moving for the turn. So nothing too crazy, pretty straightforward. So now let's look at the other activations. Well, and we'll do this maybe by theater. In northern Italy, we could, if we wanted to, activate Colli. But the reality is he only has a single Piedmontese infantry corps. It's 2 steps, but it's the only unit. We could maybe try to come down here and like pick up a detachment, but honestly, until the Austrians reinforce, the Piedmontese are essentially on defense. So I see no reason to activate him. If he gets attacked later, maybe he gets his teeth kicked in, but he retreats. We'd want to activate him to do something in reaction. So we won't waste his activation. Now we're going to leave Colli in Turin to hold fast. And everything else in Italy right now can't be activated. And just a reminder, the Neapolitans in Naples, they are allied to Britain, who is still technically neutral at the moment. So that much is done. Next, we can look at Wurttemberg. Now, Wurttemberg has a cavalry and an infantry, but he is maxed out for command. I think the way that I'm looking at this in my mind, I would rather get somebody down into northern Italy more quickly. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take Wurttemberg and we're going to move him 1, 2 through the mountain pass, 3, 4. I guess I could go this 1, 2, 3, and then, oh, wait a second. Man, this is kind of hard to tell because there's a lot going on in the hex. Mantua is actually swamp hex. So we actually might not have enough, or we will have enough movement points. What am I talking about, guys? We don't have a baggage train with Wurttemberg, so he can go 1, 2. Heck, he could go this way. Go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, maybe he can't go that way. I'm sorry, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A swamp is 2 hexes. He has 6 movement points because he has both cavalry and infantry, but no baggage train. So he would have 6 movement points. He will move to Mantua, and we will likewise put a activation over marker on him. So he was kind of the nearest leader that we could simply move through in northern Italy. So we have something to contest. If the Piedmontese fall, Mantua won't simply be empty, and we can contest northern Italy with some Austrian forces. Then again, Wurmser can come down here, and we could maybe have a composition ratio in our favor. Next, we have Latour. Now, I don't think I need to cover Innsbruck, and so we could probably just move Latour towards the French line, maybe towards Ulm or beyond it. I don't want to give them an open flank here, so I think we're going to need to move Latour up. I'm not sure he's going to be willing to engage in combat, though. He's got some basic abilities here. He's even got a combat influence. So if you look at the leader counter, that 1 at the end is a combat modifier, so he's not bad. Oh, he's got a baggage train and just an infantry corps. Ooh. Well, I think for this, we're going to want to make sure we've got a screen down here. So I think what we'll do, we will activate Latour, and we will have him go 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Or we could put him in Ulm, and maybe that's better. Yeah, so we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 into Ulm, and we'll put an activation over marker on him. As we look further north at our activation, we cannot activate Blankenstein because he's a 2 activation. I'll even zoom in so things are a little bit easier to parse here, guys. We can easily activate the Prussian leader in Berlin, who is Nobelsdorf. We should probably get him closer to the fight as well. And so I think what we'll want to do is pick his stack to go 1, 2, well, let me see what he has. He has cavalry and infantry, so he'll have 6 movement points. Go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or nope, he can't go in a Hanover. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think maybe we'll just have him go right here. He doesn't have enough movement points to enter the forest hex. And we can't send him into Hanover because they're not allied yet with Britain. So he can't just march into that territory right now, which is fine. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and not quite enough to get to this detachment in Dresden to try to absorb it. So I think this is fine, and we'll mark him similarly with an activation over. Getting some of these easy behind the line movements done so we can just get them up into a rough formation. We should be thinking about, do we want to have a reserve anywhere? You know, basically a force that can hold, and it would basically be picking someone to not activate this turn and kind of leave some stuff open. And I think we'll do that. So we're going to leave Esterhazy and Lamoden. These 2 leaders I may not activate and let them just kind of hold a rough rear position as a strategic reserve and activate them later. Because what could happen is we could find one of our Prussian or Austrian armies gets walloped in a combat, and we can move those guys into the stack as reinforcements and to integrate. And if the existing stack has taken combat losses, we can kind of put steps together and still meet stacking requirements and not leave a stack undermanned. So, you know, this is the kind of the trick of the activation system, choosing when to not activate something, to hold it into a later activation reserve, and in this case being more of a strategic reserve for those corps to reinforce an army that has suffered greater losses than we might want or expect. So we'll earmark these guys as such. So now that leaves us with only 3 other stacks that we could activate. We cannot activate Argenteau because he's a 2 activation. So it's really about either Teschen, Clefaight, and Brunswick himself. Now, Brunswick, I believe, is the best stack that we have, but let me take a look at our force composition here so you guys can see my thought process. We'll look at Teschen here. So he's a 3 leader. He's got a combat factor or combat modifier. He's got a 2-step infantry, a 2-step cavalry, and some engineers. And the engineers can help with river crossings and various things. So he's a pretty good stack. And if we were involved in combat, we would have 4 steps. And if we wanted, we could have a +1 modifier by having our cavalry be the lead unit. So not a bad stack. Not a bad stack at all. Alternatively, Clear Fate. I said it wrong, not Cliff Fate. Clear Fate. Similar, but he's only a 2-star leader, which means he's got a single step Cuirassier, which is a +2, which is potent, very potent. Then an infantry and a baggage train. So he's got limited movement either way, but so he's only got 3 steps, but that Cuirassiers could actually be very powerful. And lastly, Brunswick has similar quality leader, 3 stars though. He's got a train. He's got cavalry. He's got some infantry, even more infantry, and a backup leader. So the backup leader is really important because it means that if there's a leader loss check, Brunswick can avoid being killed. But he still has what is functionally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps. So he is the most potent force by quite a bit here on the map. So I think we probably want to activate each of those 3 armies and send them on the offensive. I think we want to try it, but let's figure out what our repercussions are going to be. Now, I will say, I guess I shouldn't look. I shouldn't even look because there is some fog of war in this game that I don't think you can look past a leader's stack, like the leader counter. So I can kind of judge by the height of the stack what I'm dealing with. But I believe that there is some fog of war in this game. Now, I'm playing this solitaire, so I would just kind of know what's in there. And technically, the setup charts are not like secret information. So I could look it up in the book without looking at the counters and say, well, I know that he's got, Demurier has 3 steps of infantry and a 4th step being cav. So this is a 4-step and a decent leader and all that jazz. This guy is going to be harder to activate, and he's only got a couple steps. So this might be the weak part of the French line. But if you look here at this cluster of 3 leaders all near one another, that's going to be a really tough nut to deal with. And I say that because it doesn't really matter what they actually have. So, I can say like, okay, Kellerman's got a couple steps. And then we have Custine, and Custine has, let's see, where's he at? He's got a couple steps. And then finally, Byron has, or Biron, I'm not sure how that's pronounced. He has a decent force. It's 3 steps. So Brunswick could come down here and fight these guys. The trick will be, will they be able to intercept to support Custine, or if they fail interception, will they march to the sounds of guns? And in which case, Brunswick could be facing a organized force of French forces that could defeat him. It might be a tighter run thing, but I do generally think we should try to go on the offensive and see where we end up, because the French army is only going to get stronger over time. The Levée en masse card will allow the French to build a bunch of infantry corps that aren't even on the map yet. They will eventually get, assuming they play the Committee of Public Safety and then eventually Carnot, the French will start to get their combat bonuses, where right now all of their units have a 0 combat bonus. So that gives a slight advantage to our forces. So I do think a all-out offensive along these 3 lines is the best thing. It to me, it is going to be about what do we do about these guys? So it's going to be Teschen versus Dumouriez, and then it's a question of, is Clerfayt and Brunswick going to come down and try to divide and conquer and leave this guy unattended, with the idea that our reserves can come up later and it's less likely that this guy's going to activate right away. Might not be a huge gamble, but it's still potentially a gamble. I don't know. I think I do want to do that. I think I want to have Clerfayt come down and attack here, maybe draw off this guy, and then Brunswick can come down and potentially face this stack 1-1 and have a pretty good advantage in fighting there. That might be the best thing to do, and then we leave this guy in a position where he might have to reinforce either side. It's a central position, but it does no good because it's too weak and will likely need to reinforce somewhere. And if all 3 of these offensives go well, then we should see ourselves operating near Lille and putting Boulogne under threat, and then we should be able to be in a good position in Lorraine. And beyond Lorraine and beyond Lille are the clear terrain areas around Burgundy and Paris. I'm sorry, you guys can't quite see that. There we go. We get past this Lorraine area, we do well, then we're operating in all this flat terrain in Paris itself. And I think we'd rather be fighting there than just about anywhere else, and putting France on the back heel early, so that as they gain their strength, they're digging themselves back out. So let's enough yapping, Steve. Let's do it. All right. So we're going to go ahead and activate Teschen. And again, he's got he's got engineers. They have a movement of 6, so that's not a big deal. So he's got 4 steps, but a movement of 6. And we'll go ahead and, let's see, we'll move 1 hex there, and this is going to be our opportunity for the first time, really, for the French to decide, do they want to intercept? So let's deal with that really quick. Okay, so as we have these guys go to move, I did realize that Dumouriez does have more steps than Teschen does, but I think Teschen still wants to try to go on the offensive. Because at this point, I just think it's more interesting if we do. So I think Dumouriez would like to intercept, because a force that successfully intercepts gets a bonus in combat. So I think Dumouriez realizes, the French player realizes, that Teschen is coming for him, might as well choose to fight it on their terms and get a bonus. So interception is a 2 dice being rolled, and you need to get a 10 or higher. 10 or higher. Now there are a few modifiers to the die roll. So if you have cavalry in the stack, except for Cossacks, light cavalry, which is just regular cavalry, you get a +1. Excuse me, a +1. If we have a cavalry leader, we get another +1. We do not have a cavalry leader, though. There are some penalties if you try to intercept into a difficult terrain hex, or over an unbridged river, which is not a problem for us. And then if there were initiative differences, that would matter too. But in this case, both leaders' initiative are the same, being 3 and 3. So it is really a 2d6 +1 die roll. The French would like a 10. I rolled the dice, and I got a 6 plus 1 is 7 is not enough. And so he does not successfully intercept. And so then we will have Teshin move to force a combat. Now, in this game, we could be looking at combat avoidance. So, like many games with this type of land movement rules, there's interception, there's combat avoidance, there's also the march to the sound of guns, which is a little bit different than some games. So here we could potentially, I guess, try to avoid combat. I'm trying to see if there's any restriction. It doesn't seem like there is. But I don't think Demurier wants to avoid combat. Now, avoid combat has a very similar die check. You roll 2 dice, you want a 10 or greater. Initiative adds, so we have a decent chance of having Demurier retreat, but I don't think Demurier wants to retreat. I think he's willing to fight this one out. And so I think that is just going to bring us into our first land combat. So the phasing player is the attacker, the non-phasing player is the defender. An overrun is not going to occur here, which just involves high ratios being compared. You can overrun in this game. Now, both sides are in supply, so we'll just get right into the combat sequence. You want to check to see if these guys are in supply, because you can have attrition depending on their supply status before combat. Both sides are in supply. Demurier is in a hex that contains a home country, a national fort. Teshin can easily trace back to Antwerp, which can trace back to Liege, which can trace back to da-da-da-da-da all the way through Germany to Austria, so no issues there. Are there any marching to the sound of guns? Well, there's no adjacent forces of either side next to the Hex of Lille, so that doesn't really matter. Next, we're going to look at the battle magnitude, which I'm reasonably confident is going to be a minor battle. Pretty sure that's the case. I'm going to just sanity check my land battle stuff. So out of supply, we check that. No march to the sound of guns. Okay. How many steps are involved? It is going to be... we have, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the French side. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 on the Austrian side, so 9 steps total. That's going to put us in the minor battle, category, which is going to govern what combat table we use. So in this game, there's actually different combat tables that are used. So the combat results table here, you can see there's 1 to 8 steps, that's a skirmish, or we use that for siege. 9 to 20 is a minor battle, 21 or more is a major battle. And you can see it changes, it's a little more bloody as the battle gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so we've done that, and now we are going to I lost my page. Okay. Compute morale. The morale of the most numerous steps. So for the French, let's see, that's a 5, a 4, 4. So there's 3 steps of morale 4, 2 steps of morale 5. So the French morale is 4. For the Austrians, we have 2 steps of 4, 2 steps of 3, and I think in that case the owner decides the morale level, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you choose. So 4 morale for the French and 4 morale for the Austrians. So that morale is going to matter based on the loser. So if you're the loser, you're going to roll against your morale. Higher the morale, the better, to see if you get slaughtered in a cavalry pursuit, which could very well happen here. So then now we have tactics. So we need to decide if we're going to use tactics cards. I think I'm going to keep to the base rule where we're only going to have tactics cards be used in a major battle only, just so that we make those a little more special, and it makes it easier for us right now just playing through the game. We're going to calculate our odds. So the important thing is, this is not a war game where each unit has some number of strength value, like a 7 or an 8 or a 9, and you add up all your attacking factors. It's going to be about the actual steps that are included. That's going to govern the force ratio. Gosh, I mean, it's like I can't even speak. So the game refers to combat points, but basically a combat point is a step. So we have 5 steps on the French side. We have 4 steps on the Austrian side. Okay, really quick, I want to point out, I realized this as we were going, that we came into Lille, which is a fortress. We could have had de Maurier choose to hole up in the fortress itself, but that changes the way that the combat was going to work, and it would effectively mean that these guys are trapped inside the fort, potentially with units that could not be supplied by the internal fortress supply, and a 2-level fort can only provide supply for a few units. So de Maurier, just to make it clear, decided to stay outside of the fort and fight a field battle, believing themselves to have the superior position, which I guess technically they do, but we'll see how it pans out. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to calculate the Dieroll modifiers for combat for each side separately. So the combat odds do matter. Now it's 4 to, and you do this for both, right? So for the Austrians, it's 4 steps to 5 steps, which comes out to be 0.8 and basically rounds up to 1-to-1 odds. The French have 5 to 4, which also basically rounds down to 1-to-1 strength ratio, and you round to the nearest whole number there. So it's close enough to be 1-to-1 odds. So that effectively means that there is no Dieroll modifier for either side due to force ratio. Next thing we want to look at is going to be if terrain affects anything, and in this case it doesn't. We're in clear terrain in front of a fortress, so it doesn't matter. We want to look at artillery superiority. So who's got the most artillery? Where's the artillery at? Artillery is the number in the middle of a counter. So when we start talking about, is a unit really good because it's got artillery, you do want to look at the number of factors that it has. And I just want to make sure that that I'm not fibbing to you. Artillery value, so there's artillery with this cavalry. There's no artillery for this reduced infantry corps that de Maurier has, but then he has 1 more from his full strength infantry. So there's 2 artillery with de Maurier. For the Austrians, their cavalry has artillery and their unit has artillery. So it's 2 artillery to 2 artillery. If one side had more than the other, as an explicit, you have more, then you would potentially have a +1. If you had twice as many or more, you get a +2. So in this case, everyone's got enough artillery that it's even. Cavalry superiority also matters. Very similarly, almost the same kind of logic. So you do want a mixed force in this game, which helps represent the combined arms of Napoleonic warfare. If you lack of one, you're going to suffer some problems. As we look at this, we have 2 steps of cavalry on the French side. We have 2 steps of cavalry on the Austrian side. So again, cavalry is even. So far, this is a very even contest. I will say that terrain can also affect cavalry and artillery effects. So now we need to pick we're going to have our leader effects. So each leader has a +1 for their leader ability. There's no subordinate leaders, or else we'd get to add those as well if we wish to give them a casualty check. That's why extra leaders is always good. So each one's going to get a +1 to the die roll. So far, still pretty darn even. And now we have to look at our lead assault unit. So basically, each side has to pick a unit as their lead assault unit whose combat modifier will apply to the battle. The downside is that the first loss will be applied to his corps, to this corps. So in the French case, it doesn't matter so much which they pick. They've either got to pick an infantry or they've got to pick a cavalry. And it doesn't matter which they use because the lead unit provides a bonus to combat. But again, the French do not have any access to that. You're going to notice a little mark on that counter. That's just me addressing some errata on the counter. So try to ignore that, guys. Now you're looking at it because I called it out. So I think in this case, Demurier wants to say, why don't we have an infantry take it because we don't want to lose our cavalry, right? Cavalry is valuable. We want to retain our cavalry. So we're going to say our lead unit is our reduced infantry. And I believe we can pick the reduced infantry. I don't think there's a restriction on that. So that's who they're picking. You could almost, I feel like you almost need an off-map box for combat just to help with this stuff. Now, the Austrians have a more difficult decision to make. They can either use their infantry and get no bonus, or they can do their cavalry and get a bonus and edge out the French a little bit here. They're almost certainly probably going to take a step loss on that cavalry if they use it, which could lead to a lack of have a cavalry disadvantage in later combats. So is it worth it to go hard now or not? Are we bold? Are we mice or are we men? I think we'll have the Austrians say, oh, let's see. What about our strategic reserve? We could replace our infantry losses more easily than we can replace our cavalry losses. So let's go ahead. We're going to be mice. We're not going to be men. And we're going to say our infantry will be our lead unit. So both sides will have a +0 for that. There was no interception or anything else worthwhile. And so I believe that's all of our calculations. So I want to be careful of making it seem like this is a super duper mega involved process. It's really not that bad, but I'm making sure to explain this diligently with you guys so you understand how it will go in future combats. You want to be looking at the number of steps, which will tell you the ratio. So a bigger force will get bonuses against a smaller force by some degree. And then the lead unit will matter. So you're basically putting a unit up for sacrifice potentially, but they could shift the battle in a big way. And then you also care about the artillery levels and the cavalry levels, which influence combat. The one advantage here for the French will be if they take a step loss off this guy, it's not going to change their artillery value, but the Austrians, if they take a step loss, will lose some of their artillery. So it's almost, this attritional situation is probably not to the Austrians' advantage, but if they can force Dumouriez back, that may just be better for them in the long run. So we'll see how it goes. Now, now that we're at this point, we've done all of our calculations. Both sides are done doing the calculation. Basically, both sides are only getting a +1 for their leader. No other Dieroll modifiers will matter. And I believe we can simply roll the combat results, which, just to be clear again, both sides are rolling combat rolls, right? Both sides are rolling the die for this, which makes it at least a little more interesting for that. So the die rolls are 2d6, and we'll see what we get. So I guess I need to pick. I guess the Austrians are the attackers, so we'll roll for them first. So 2d6 plus 1. Yeah, 2d6 plus 1. So we'll roll it. Oof! We rolled an 11, which is good. That's very good. So that's going to be 2 step losses to the French. We'll adjudicate losses in a second, because I think the die rolls are supposed to be simultaneous, so it doesn't really matter. Yeah, each side is simultaneous. You need an extra set of dice. So the French will now roll 2d6 plus 1. And they did much worse. So they rolled a 5 plus 1 is a 6. So a 6 here is just 1 step loss. And that's the main impact. So let's see. The winning side is the side which inflicts the most step losses on its enemy. Okay, so the Austrians have won a victory here. It is not a tie, so we can't use the Valmy combat. Well, I guess we could use Valmy, but we're not going to get its full effect. So we could, after the result is known and before a French force makes a morale check, we can make this force automatically pass its morale check, which I'm thinking we may want to do. Dumouriez is kind of our best force. If his force gets weakened enough that whole front collapses, Paris is in deep trouble. So I think what we are going to do is we are going to play the Valmy card. Okay, so Battle of Valmy. We'll play this. It'll be removed from the game. It will mean that the whites, the coalition, will get the King of France executed, but they still can't play that until after the Committee of Public Safety. So why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? Well, once the combat stuff is resolved, then there's a demoralization check. And if we failed it, then they would get a cavalry pursuit, and basically we would lose another step, and Dumouriez's force would be just ripped apart, ripped to shreds. So we would definitely want to avoid that. But now we're going to take our actual step losses. So this infantry corps is removed. I'll just put it off map here in a dead pile. And then we need to take a second step loss. And there's not many good options here. I guess we'll just take it to our infantry, right? And then the Austrians will take their step loss to their infantry. Let's see. Okay. Do we want to have a commander dismissal? No, I think Dumouriez is pretty good, so we're not going to get rid of him. I can't easily put a better leader into place, I don't think. We don't have access to Bonaparte yet. And now the retreating player... Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see. If neither result includes a plus, the attacker may choose to fight a second combat round or to retreat. I think the Austrians want to go again. I feel like because they basically have 3 steps, and now the French have 3 steps, and now is where we probably get them on an advantage die roll somewhere and try to knock him out. So do the French stick around? Let me think about this for a moment. Okay, I had to double check here, guys. I want to correct a mistake I mentioned. I think I mentioned something about the combat could have gone to a second round. I believe that is only the case when there are ties. So the fact that the Austrians just straight up got a 2 versus the French 1, there is no option for the French to fight a second combat round, even if they wanted to. So they really can't avoid the loss. We did play my play of the Valmy card, though. I think I'm going to take back, and I'm going to just allow myself to take that back because I don't think the Valmy card is needed. I was trying to look at, what's the morale situation here, right? And when we had our combat, our morale was a 4 as the French. And then for the actual, demoralization, I think we actually have a high enough morale that it would be okay to not play the Valmy card. Because just, again, to show the importance of the Valmy card, before a French force makes a morale check, the force automatically passes. But the battle wasn't a draw. But we were basically saying, well, we want to pass that morale check because it's really important. Well, I don't think I really need to, or I don't think it's worth doing. So here's why. When you lose a minor or major battle, this triggers a demoralization check, a morale check. So what you're going to do, you're going to roll a single die. And if the die roll result is greater than the force morale, then the force receives a demoralization marker, and then you also have cavalry pursuit, which will likely hurt the French even more. So you really don't want to be demoralized, right? There are other things like they can automatically avoid combat, which is, I guess, kind of a good thing, but their force morale is lowered. They can't do intercepts. And if they're involved in another combat and demoralize again, they're completely eliminated, and they have a -2 in combat. So it's a whole bad thing. You don't want to be demoralized, but I don't think we need the Valmy card because the French morale is high enough, and Dumouriez helps. So there's a Dieroll modifier to this check, or the overall commander's combat modifier provides a bonus to the morale. So our French morale goes from 4 to 5 on the demoralization check. I guess we should have considered. Well, I guess the leader could die, so this is why you don't include the leader's value in the morale until the demoralization check. So Dumouriez didn't die, so he gets to add his combat bonus of 1 to the morale level, which now makes it a 5. Let's see, the difference between the loser's effective losses and the winner's effective losses is 1. So we still have a morale of 4, which gives us a pretty good. I mean, it's only 2/3. So now that I've done the calculation, I forgot about the difference in losses modifier. So that might actually make this a little trickier. I was hoping it would be I only need to roll a 6 to be demoralized. But I don't know. Let's take a little bit of a risk and roll the die and see what happens. Okay, I rolled a 4, and that is enough to stay not demoralized as it happens. So we had a morale of 4. We had to roll greater, damn near run thing. Not quite Waterloo, I guess maybe, but a near run thing. We avoid demoralization. We retain our Valmy card is how I'm going to work that, and I'm going to have him uh, retreat 2 hexes. That's our option to here, and this leads Teschen to be at Lille, basically treating that as a siege. Now, very quickly, if you win a battle in a hex where there's a fortress, you get a free siege attempt. So we did win a victory. So as Teschen's, force has pushed the French revolutionaries back, well, I guess just the French army yet, because we haven't killed the king. As the French, we're going to get a free siege roll against Lille, and just to quickly show the sort of math on this. Here's the siege table that we use. So we use the siege table, not the combat table, to start with, and you use the column that is based on the fort level. So Lille is a level 2 fort, so we use Fortress 2, and you can see there's results that will do a step loss to the besieger. There are ones that can cause a combat and then a total surrender, but the units that were besieged get to come back next year. And then there's a breach, which is a guaranteed surrender with some combat. But if you look at the way the chart goes, remember you're using 2d6, so you have a bell curve. So a regular die roll on a 2d6 is likely going to be a no result. However, for every siege attempt that fails, you get a +1. So that bell curve starts to shift to, in my head, the right, because I'm thinking of an actual bell curve graph in my mind. And then you add other bonuses, and it honestly, in my mind, it's much easier to get bonuses than penalties on this die roll. Only the besieger rolls, so you might not get artillery superiority if the fortress is big and you don't have much artillery, but if you have engineers like the Austrians, and then you start getting more of those levels of siege, you're almost guaranteed to take the seat, to take the fortress, because you're going to have your bell curve shift the top of the bell down to here with only just a couple of modifiers. This is why I did not have de Maurier retreat into the fort, because the strength inside the fort doesn't really do a whole lot for us. It doesn't change those modifiers very much. And again, assuming Teschen has multiple tries at it, which he very likely would, we're going to get that shifted bell curve, and the fortress is going to be captured. And we could have potentially lost all of de Maurier's stack to an honors of war. I mean, we'd get them back, but that's a rough go of it. So that is why I opted to not sit in the fort. You would only really want to sit in a fort in this game, I think, if you had a very good chance of having a relief force come and save you. And meaning, like, you just expect on the next action you're going to be able to relieve that force. In this case, I don't think I have enough forces, at the ready to save de Maurier before he would be captured. The force of Teschen is big enough that, like, it just wouldn't work out in my favor. So when you think about, like, the example of play on the Marengo campaign, where, like, Napoleon can potentially save, who is it, like Massena, I think, who's in Genoa or something, like, that makes more sense because you've got a high likelihood that Napoleon or someone could come save. Here, de Maurier would not be in such a good position, so it does not make sense to try to stay inside the fort. Generally speaking, in this game, forts are not going to last very long. That description I gave you about the bell curve and the shifting of the bell curve with modifiers, it's not that hard to get modifiers, and so your bell curve is really going to be higher than you think. And this kind of matches what really historically happened. I mean, there were certainly sieges in the Napoleonic era, but not like there were in previous wars. And so we were sort of reaching the back and forth in tactical warfare history or operational warfare history of, like, Sometimes defense and prepared defenses are better than attack, and the ability for the attacker to overwhelm those defenses. Sometimes the attacker has too much of an advantage, and so you don't use prepared defenses anymore. And it goes back and forth depending on the technology of artillery and fortifications. Well, in the Napoleonic era, technically we're a little bit before the Napoleonic era, sieges aren't super important in terms of like, do you put your army in a fortress for a siege? You would rather have your army in a field battle, and there will be sieges, but they will be addressed relatively quickly, and so your more decisive action will be the field battle. So anyway, that's a whole tangent, guys. I don't mean to do that. Sorry, this video is long enough. So, but that is why, just again, we need to explain why we're taking the actions we're taking, so everything else I do in future videos at a much faster pace will make sense to you. Dumouriez retreats rather than to go into the fort. This provides Teschen an opportunity to do a siege attempt. He will do so. So his modifiers for this, he does not have artillery superiority. He does have a leader bonus, and he does have an engineer. Now, let me zoom back in a second. We showed this earlier, but he has engineers with him. So this is where the engineers are valuable. They provide, I mean, they can do other stuff too, don't get me wrong, but they can provide that +1 on the siege rolls. So we'll do the roll. That's not so good, but shifting on the bell curve gives us a no result. So we'll throw one of these guys, whoops, like so. So that was our free siege attempt, and we did not succeed. We got a no result, but even a no effect result gives an additional siege level. So now we get a +1 for every siege level. That'll keep going up, 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 and up. So this is where you can see you eventually can take a siege, take a fortress pretty quickly in a season's time frame. Now, Teschen's activation is not over. He won a victory, and he had a siege attempt, but a siege attempt is different from a combat. He can try again, I believe. Let's see, let me make sure of that. Yeah, siege attempt is not a land battle, and the facing player can resume his movement after the siege attempt if they have remaining movement points. Teschen does. He's only used 3 of his 6 so far. He went 1, 2, you spend a movement point for you end up losing a movement point from combat if you're the winner. But he still has 3 left. He's not moved very far with his infantry and cavalry force. So he can do 1 more siege attempt. He spends 2 movement points because that is the size of the fortress. So to do, if he were attacking a level 1 fort, it would just be 1 movement point. So you can see even level 1 forts can be stomped pretty quickly. A 2 is a little more difficult. So he's going to use 2 movement points. He'll have 1 remaining, which won't be enough to really do anything, but that's what he wants to do. And we'll roll again. And this time we're going to have a +3 to the die roll. And, okay, so we got a 10 +3 is 13. That's honors of war. Okay, so had Dumouriez been in there, guys, we would have lost all of Dumouriez's forces for several turns. But there's no units there. It kind of doesn't matter. So Lille is taken, but we need to, now we have a different decision to make. So ordinarily, let's see if I can find the right marker. Here we go. So if we've taken Lille, right? We've defeated the fortress. We've taken it. We've eliminated the garrison. Ordinarily, we would put a fortress removed marker there, and Teschen is just sitting on the hex. There is no fortification benefit. It is not serving any good purpose to the Austrians at the moment. However, they do have a choice to spend a step, the Austrians do, to replenish Lille and basically put a new garrison in there, and then Lille will act as a supply chain link for the Austrians, allowing them to project greater force into France proper. And when you figure we're really only 3 hexes away from Paris, that's a pretty good deal. Here's the problem, though. If we do spend a step we're either going to spend our last infantry step. Oh, we only took one step loss, so this guy shouldn't be reduced. I don't know how that happened. Okay. I'll double check Teshin's strength here in a minute, but if we spend yeah, this should be unflipped. I'm not sure how that happened. Anyway, this guy should be 2 steps. We could spend an artillery step and replenish this guy, but then Teshin's force would only have 2 steps left. And that would be an advantage to the French, I think, certainly. And the French could counterattack and very, very well hurt Teshin's force. So I think it would be a mistake right now to spend the step. But we can still sit on the hex, and if we retain control of it, during the production phase of the spring interphase in a few months, we can pay to replenish the garrison. There's a production step. It's, let's see if I can find it here. It's not terribly expensive. Fortress garrison, 2 production points per step. And then you can replenish it, and then we'd probably put some kind of control marker on here to denote that it's Austrian, one of my discs or something. Now, what I'm trying to figure out is this the only time we're allowed to do it? It seems like that's the case. Yeah, I'll have to look at that, guys. I think for now, we're just going to leave Teshin not replenishing the garrison, and that will be that. And yeah, let's move on.